presence maybe 8 years ago, 6 years ago, the what he shared at that time just was what my heart needed at that time. And his name has never left my mind. And so I'd like to call up Lisa Chatelaine, superintendent, to introduce Dr. Leroy Littlebear. You are in for a blessing.
Thank you, Patricia. Miu Gisagaw. Uh, Last year, we tried to get Dr. Leroy Littlebear, but he works at the University of Lethbridge. And at that time, his students there, they also have language gathering. And then he wasn't able to come. And then this year, he was waiting for me to call him. And so he said he had other people wanting him or inviting him, and he was waiting for this. So I'm thankful that he accepted our invitation. Thank you, Dr. Leroy. So Dr. Leroy Littlebear is a Blackfoot researcher, professor emeritus at the University of Lethbridge, a founding member of Canada's first Native American Studies Department, and he's a recognized leader and advocate for the First Nations education rights, self-governance, language, and culture. He has received numerous awards and recognition for his work, including the Officer Order of Canada and the Alberta Order of Excellence. Dr. Leroy Littlebear was born and raised on the Kainai First Nation in Alberta. And Littlebear was one of 7 children, and he attended the On Reserve Residential School. So let's give a round of applause and invite Dr. Leroy Littlebear.
Can you release
Yeah.
that? Exactly. Okay. Sik van ek so met so nog boa. Nes stoor na kook. Ika skinewa. Hi naksiks. Ganawa. Sakita pio. Hene nog doet sitapi. I was just talking to you in Mongolian. Now I was introducing myself in traditional Blackfoot way. My Blackfoot name is Ika Skinny, which translates to low horn. And we're of Nuxiks, the Small Ropes clan. And we belong to Ghana, or sometimes referred to as the Blood Tribe. And we are, at the Blackfoot Confederacy. la, la, yeah, la, yeah, hey, la, la, yeah. La, 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 yeah, la, la, yeah. La, la, yeah, la, yeah. Hey, la, la, yeah. That's the song of my clan, Enuxies. When we're moving camp, coming to Akukatsis, the all encampment during the summer, hey, our clan and different clans would sing these songs to signify, hey, the Small Roads clan has arrived. And we want to take this opportunity, sing in our song to say, hey, I'm very, very honored to come and share thoughts with you people. And I want to congratulate Meadow Lake Tribal Council for putting on these types of conferences. They're really about renewal, and I'll speak a little bit more to that. But I thought I'd tell you first that have you ever seen, for some of us older people, we used to have these TV antennas on top of the roof and so on, way back when we didn't have wireless at that time. And there were these two houses, one on each side of the road. And these antennas had been on those houses for years. But finally, one of those antennas said to the other one, I think it was one Cree antenna and the other one might have been, Dene, said to the other antenna, hey, we've been here for all these years. How about if we get married? Well, they did get married, but the wedding wasn't much to talk about. But they had a fantastic reception. It takes a little while to catch on. What I want to talk to you about is a little bit about identity. Our youth, especially, have lost a lot of our indigenous identity. And talking about identity, I tell people, hey, when I start losing my indigenous identity, I get on WestJet to let people know I'm a Plains Indian. And talking about identity, I woke up this morning, cleaning up, I looked in the mirror and it looked the other way. you know. So I know I have a little bit of a problem. So on. Well, let me let's see if we can wrap our minds around this notion of identity, because it's very, very important. And the reason is, hey, if I were to resurrect 200 years from now, if I were to resurrect 200 years from now, will I hear my songs? Will I hear Cree, Blackfoot? Or will I be waking up to some strange language like rap? See, so if we want to be around and be relevant, we have to maintain our languages and our songs, our stories, our ceremonies. You see, identity is a very important, concept. Individuals use a whole bunch of different criteria to identify who they are. Okay. And you see some of those listed. But to give you a difference between Western and, indigenous identity, hey, when we first come to other tribal territories, hey, people, when we meet people, the first thing they ask you is, where are you from? What tribe do you belong to? And so on. Whereas in Western society, guess what? We always want to find out what a person does, what they do. So they end up introducing themselves. I'm so and so, and I, I'm a teacher, I'm a lawyer, I'm an engineer. See, I'm a plumber, maybe with pipe dreams. But the thing is, see, a very different basis of identity. See, one is associated with a specialty, the other one is associated with, hey, relationships. Okay. Now, every morning, think about this. Every morning, you wake up, and when you wake up, you think you are waking up to the reality. But that's not true. See, a Nobel Prize winner, Steven Weinberg, says there is an objective reality out there. There is an objective reality. But as soon as you put a human being in the picture, that objective reality becomes an interpretation by the human. See, so you're no longer dealing with the objective reality, you're dealing with the interpretation. And that's what you're waking up to. See. Now, how does that interpretation really come about? That interpretation really is a product of all the mutual relationships of a society with the totality of the environment that they are part of. Now, how a society comes into existence, there's a number of theories and hypotheses and so on around that issue. But however they come into existence, sooner or later, that society claims a territory. See, and that's why we say Cree territory, Blackfoot territory, and of course the Western world says our country and our dominion and so on. See, but sooner or later, that society claims a territory, and it's within that territory that through all the mutual relationships with the territory, the plants, the animals, the sky, and so on, that we come up with what I refer to as an interpretive template. Okay. In other words, criteria that we use to talk about that reality we're waking up to. See? But keep in mind that that reality really is just an interpretation. In other words, all cultures have an interpretive template that their members use. Okay? So if I wake up in Blackfoot territory, if you wake up in Cree territory, hey, it's the surroundings and all that I'm part of, where my interpretive template arises from. See? So that interpretive template is really what forms our, our ideas, our science, our languages, and so on. So Western thought has a very different interpretive template. Cree have very different interpretive template. See? And that's why people don't take time to understand that. That's why we have all the problems associated with difference, like racism and so on. So the Western interpretive template kind of consists of the following. They may argue with me, but this is how they think. In other words, here's their criteria for their interpretive template. Okay? That interpretive template in Western thought is that everything is about matter. Hey, knock on wood, something I can touch, something I can actually see, and so on. Okay. In the Western interpretive template, hey, it's about the notion of certainty. Okay. In other words, if you want to put it in a Christian context, it says, this is the way God made it. And this is the way it will be forever and a day. See, it's the way God made it. And God's work is beautiful. See. And you'll see ours is very different. See. In the Western thought, everything is inanimate. Everything is inanimate, except for you and I, and maybe those rest dogs, but everything is inanimate. See? And when we start fooling around with those notions, we see that our interpretive template says, hey, we may start out with a broad perspective, but we always come down to the point. In other words, linear. Hey, it's very specific. We always come down to the point. In other words, reductionism. See, that's how they think. See, and, you know, they're thinking based on the notion of time, when in reality, there's no such thing. It's all human made. That notion of time, takes you from A to B to C to D and so on. See? And the thing is, it's kind of like the simplistic saying, been there, done, did it. Been there, done, did it. In other words, hey, yeah, we already know that. In other words, there's no such thing as the notion of what we will call renewal. And I'll say a little bit more about that. It's all about, hey, let's move on. See? And consequently, things like, hey, get with the program. You know, things like that arise in Western thought. See? And their language speaks to and complements that interpretive template. In other words, hey, very noun based, it's all about naming things. English, for instance, is a very good language for categorizations, naming things, and so on. But let me just give you a couple examples. One of them, when we're thinking in English, the ordinary English sentence, very simple sentence, is structured as A is B. That's the ordinary English sentence. A is B. Okay? Well, stop and think about it. If A is B, why do you need B? Why do you need the B? If the two are the same, say, that's why our elders say, hey, I am the environment. See, I am the buffalo, and the buffalo is me. See, that's an impossibility in English. And what arises out of that is, hey, there's always a need for the other. A is B, B is the other. There's always a need for the other. And there are some things that are not even possible in English that are possible in Cree, in Blackfoot thinking and so on, which have a lot of implications for science. And that my favorite story is talking to a Haida, and the issue came up: dynamics without motion. Think about it: dynamics without motion. In English, that's an inherent contradiction. See? But the Haida elder we were talking to thought about it a little bit, and he says, "Oh, very easy to explain." He says, "Hey, think about going out on the ocean in a canoe. And when you're far enough out in the ocean where you cannot see the land anymore and use the land as a reference, you know your canoe is moving because you're rowing it, but 360 degrees around you, you're always the same distance from the horizon." That's dynamics without motion. See, that's possible in Cree, in Blackfoot, in Haida, which is not possible in English thought. Say. So there are those differences when we say. So we say, but Blackfoot, Cree, and so on have a very different interpretive template. Let's look at that. See, all societies at one time or another lay claim to their territory, as we've said, and that starts to be part of our source of identity, so on. And all our paradigmatic concepts, values, and customs are those tacit infrastructures. In other words, they're part of you and you've embodied them so much, you don't even question or think about them. They're just part of you. Okay. And this society uses those for their beliefs, behavior, and relationships. Now, land, for instance, is a source of identity for us. These beliefs, behavior, and relationship norms manifest as the metaphysics or the paradigms, in other words, the foundational basis of our thinking process. So, if we're going to understand each other and if we're going to understand our own culture in a much deeper way, we have to become familiar with those tacit infrastructures that we use for that interpretive template. So the metaphysics of our society may be different from somebody else's. Okay. So let me explain, because I grew up in Blackfoot traditions, but you can easily take three in place of Blackfoot. Okay. So in Blackfoot, we have what we refer to as constant flux. Okay. In other words, everything is always in motion, things are changing all the time, so on. In other words, try and make an appointment with a Blackfoot, and you tell him we'll meet at 2:00, and he says yes. But if I'm not there, I'm over at my grandma's. If I'm not at my grandma's and you don't see my horse over there, I'm over at my uncle's. See, in other words, things are always changing. We can never really talk about certainty. See, whereas in English thought, we're always want to come down to that certainty. See, and that's what, you know, those notions, those metaphysics begin to be part of that very big difference and so on. You know, that those, so when we talk about constant flux, here's a picture of from outer space. That's how it looks. And it's in a state of flux. See, things are always moving and changing, transforming, reforming, and so on. Okay. Ours is about energy waves. It's not about matter as it is in English thought. It's about energy waves. When you hear the elders talking about the spirit, they're really talking about those energy waves. The energy waves really are the spirit. Say. And, you know, if we move on, we find that everything in our world is, you know, about it's everything in is animate. Whereas in English thought, as we've said, everything is inanimate except for you and I. See, but in our world, everything is is animate. Everything, the rocks, the trees, and so on, all have spirit and so on. Just like yesterday, went for a short walk. I was tried to talk to this tree, but could understand Blackfoot. So, and a lot of times, you know, people say, hey, if we see somebody talking to a rock, you know, and another Cree person hears that, they'll probably join the conversation, you know. See. So, very different way of thinking. In our world, everything is about relationships. Everything is interrelated. Just think about a complicated spider web network. Everything is related. That's why we're saying in Western thought, we try to isolate. See, whereas in ours, it's always a holistic thinking. One of my favorite stories about that is we were in grade 3 or so on the residential schools, and the teacher was teaching us about provinces, capital cities, and so on. And at the end of her lesson, she says, hey, let's see what we can remember. And she called on my friend sitting in front of me, Moses. Moses, what's the capital city of Canada? And Moses, never looking at the teacher, just looking up and down, kind of scratching his head. Hey, capital city of Canada is uh, uh, and before Moses was able to answer, the teacher says next, pointing to me, because I was sitting behind Moses. And in my mind, I immediately thought, gee, this teacher is really rude. I know my friend Moses knows the answer because we were talking about it outside during recess, you know. But the teacher just never gave Moses the time to answer. So guess what I did? Capital city of Canada is um, uh, the teacher says next. The teacher went up and down the rows, never got a response. And so she thought nobody knew the answer. She says, oh, okay, take your books out and we'll go over the lesson again. Well, the second time around was when we were all drawing, not listening to the, but see, very different way of thinking brings about that difference. Everything in our world has to be renewed. Okay. If you can picture that flux, hey, all of a sudden, sometimes we start to see recurring patterns. And it's those recurring patterns that we start to use and say, hey, that's part of what gives us existence. So that's the reason why we end up repeating, re-singing, retelling, and redoing our ceremonies. It's repetition every year. We even tell the same jokes. And even though everybody knows the punchline, hey, everybody still has a good laugh, and so on. See? So the notion of renewal is very, very important. Okay. Whereas, as we've said, in Western thought, it's kind of like been there, done, did it. Let's move on. See. And our language leads us because that relationship with the land, we always refer back to the land. And even though the land, because of the flux, is going to change, it doesn't change as fast as other things. Consequently, I can use for the time being the land. See, guess why? When we deal with Western society, it's always about land. Land always comes up. And that's our relationship to the land. And our languages, for instance, are very process, action oriented, and so on. Some of the examples that I come up with in Blackfoot, we say imitao. Imitao speaks to, if you asked another Blackfoot speaker to translate imitao to English, he'll basically say, oh, that's dog. But in English, a dog is a dog is a dog is a dog. You can keep going. But in Blackfoot, we never say what it is, but we observe what's happening, and that is, it's a being of some kind. We don't say what it is, that's on the move. That's what a dog is. So, and it may appear this way anthropomorphically, it may appear this way, but it can change. It can change forms. It can appear different. See? So think about those rest dogs and that. See? So now, land as a source of identity, then hundreds of generations of our people have come and gone on these territories. Okay? You know, the archaeologists came up with the theory of the ice-free corridor from the last ice age to try and explain how we came from the Bering Strait and there was this ice-free corridor. Well, think about it. Right here in these territories, in Saskatchewan and Alberta, was the ice-free corridor. And the archaeologist says, we do find there is this culture, you know, that developed within the ice-free corridor. And we were telling them, hey, maybe those were Blackfoot from way back. Maybe those were, Cree from way back, you know. See. So in other words, our relationship with the territory that we're on now goes way back. See. That's why it becomes a very important aspect of the notion of identity. To be knowledgeable about culture, one must have a good understanding of these paradigms or metaphysics. If one is to transfer knowledge, okay, you must have a very good idea about them if you want to transfer. Otherwise, it's just memory, rote memory, and you know, and paradigms and metaphysics are the foundational basis of a society's way of thinking, beliefs, behavior, customs, and values. Now, for Indians, the ensoulment of the land is a web of relationships with the earth, animals, plants, inorganic matter, and the cosmos. It is captured in the stories, the songs, and the ceremonies. That's why our elders say, if you want to know our law, sing the songs, tell the stories. See. And for David Abram, he says, events happen somewhere. Events belong to the place. And to tell the story of events is to let the place speak through the telling. That's how it stays alive, and so on. Okay. So land is a uh, very important aspect of our society. The land is mother. It cannot be separated from us. See? And some of you may have listened to and met Greg Kahete. He talks about the ensoulment of the land. The ensoulment of nature is one of the oldest ways of, approaching, if you want to call psychology today, you know. So, manifestations of the paradigm in and with the land. You could tell from what we've already said that one can conclude that it is the place that determines who you are. And Ann Waters, a, an indigenous philosopher from Florida, says American Indian identity and worldview, a history of place consciousness preserved through oral history. In other words, the telling of the stories manifests discrete geographical place symbols within the consciousness that provide a conceptual framework of identity as place. So, in other words, indigenous identity, Cree, Sioux, Blackfoot, identity really is about place. American Indian consciousness and hence American Indian identity is cognitively of and interdependent with our land base. So a loss of identity may be that the loss of those stories, those songs, and those ceremonies. So when we're talking about our people, especially associated with the notion of mental illness and so on, it may very well be that it's a loss of those stories, a loss of those songs, so that it does not, the land does not recognize you anymore. See? And you don't recognize the land. See? What does all of this mean for us adults? What does that mean for us as parents or teachers? It means that we have to bring up our children in a cultural atmosphere that best resembles the land where they came from. The land is their identity. You should know and teach the songs, stories, and ceremonies of that land. See, that's what we need to teach. See. And as we were saying earlier, if I were to resurrect in 200 years from now, will I be a stranger to the people that I'm waking up to? To be Blackfoot, you can say to be Cree, means that I have to live by the teachings contained in those songs, stories, and ceremonies. It means I must be able to transmit those teachings to the younger generation if my Blackfoot, Cree, Sioux world is to continue. We have to do that. If we don't, hey, yeah, 200 years from now, if you resurrect, you'll be waking up to strangers. Yeah. Now, I want to show you don't see this word very much and very often, and that is the word axiology. Axiology really speaks to the value of what you are teaching. Okay. So, in other words, In Western schools, with Cree students going over there, it may be that they're not finding very much meaning in what is being thrown at them. Say. So, in other words, that education may not be of much value. See. So, actually, axiology speaks to that notion about the value of what we are actually teaching. Okay. So today, people are looking a bit deeper. See, because of colonization, many of us got bought into the idea that our indigenous knowledge has nothing to contribute to the overall field of knowledge. But if we just look a little bit deeper, we discover that in many fields, people are just beginning to find out about those things that we know. Let me give you a few examples. In science, time and space, according to Einstein, my drinking partner, you know, he says that time and space are the same. And he caused the scientific revolution with that notion. Well, guess what? Time and space being the same has always been the case in Cree, has always been the case in Blackfoot. Hey, somebody that I see over there walking, and somebody I saw 2 months ago, I would speak about them in the same way or speak to them in the same way. So, in other words, the notion of time and space is old hat to us, nothing new. But for them, it was such a fantastic discovery. Notions like non-locality, Higgs particle, spatial dimensions are things that we have a totally different deal. Think about the Haida. Says, hey, dynamics without motion. Say, those kind of scientific notions, hey, we've always known those. So, in other words, that's something we should be teaching our children from a Cree, from a Blackfoot, from a Diné perspective. In economics, hey, we've always dealt with the notion of holistic thinking, sustainability. In other words, we just take what we need and so on. And modern day economics are just now discovering the whole notion of sustainability. You take any economic magazine, you'll find an article on sustainability. In psychology, Maslow came up with the hierarchy of needs. Okay? And I don't mind talking about Maslow because those hierarchy of needs that he came up with were Blackfoot teachings. He got that from the Blackfoot, but he never gave them credit. So he talks about physical needs, emotional needs, security, and so on. And when you have all of those factors in your life, you know, a kid being brought up in those, they become self actualizing individuals. See, the only thing that I had a qualm with Maslow was he left the whole notion about spirituality out of that hierarchy of needs. See, he never included the notion of spirituality. But hey, we already had those psychological teachings. And hey, that's something our people knew. In law, hey, the law courts, the Supreme Court now is saying oral history is, is equal to, in terms of evidence, they're equal to written documents. You just have to read the BC case, Dalgamuk case. That's what they're talking about. In other words, oral stories are the equivalent of written documents. Okay. Relationships, hey, it really messes Western organizations when you make exceptions and so on to their nice flow charts, their organizational charts. Well, hey, our people can deal with complexity, see, and so on. And what's complex, we make it simple. See, I think it was Eleanor Roosevelt who recognized that, and she came up with a saying that said, "Give me simplicity on the other side of complexity." See, and so often we get stuck in the complexity aspect. In other words, dotting the I's, crossing the T's, and so on, that aspect, rather than the more important aspect about lesson, knowledge. See? So those are examples that we know exists. In our prairie territory, for instance, the buffalo was very important. And there was a time when governments on both sides of the border tried to get rid of us by getting rid of the buffalo. So the near extinction of the buffalo resulted in a large part of Plains culture's disappearance. But the buffalo is coming back, and our cultures are reawakening. Our youth and the ones that are the ones that will carry our lifeways into the distant future. That's why our youth are our sacred bundles. We really have to take care of our youth. They're going to be our leaders into the future. So, what does all of this land, mean for land-based learning approaches to education? Say, well, Blackfoot people, Cree people mark their territories not by metes and bounds, but by sacred sites. These sites have stories, songs, and ceremonies that go with them. So it means that we must take our youth out to those sacred sites to hear the songs, stories, and participate in the ceremonies. And if they do, they will know who they are. So, in other words, the identity problem is not going to exist anymore. So, when Europeans came to North America, They came with the belief that their interpretive template was the only template. In other words, they were saying to everybody, this is reality. In other words, their interpretive template was the reality. Okay. But they are not so sure anymore. But they were telling us your interpretive templates, your knowledge and all that is just myth. See, they didn't pay much attention to it, but they are not so sure now. That is why they are hungry for our knowledge today. They're wanting to find out what our knowledge is all about. We Blackfoot, Tree, and so on have tried their template. Okay, we've tried their ways and so on, but those never worked for us. So it is time to go back to our lodges and bring out our own interpretive templates. So those notions, that deep knowledge that comes from those metaphysics is what we have to understand in a deep sense and so on, not just superficial stuff. See? So when we really understand what those templates, interpretive templates, do to us, whether they're Western or Cree, hey, that's when we'll have a much better direction when it comes to education, when it comes to relationships with government, when it comes to teaching our kids. So I know those are heavy thoughts to think about, takes a little bit of time to digest. But I would really want to thank you for allowing me to share those thoughts with you. And hopefully, hey, our youth, 10 years from now, 20 years from now, hey, they will be able to, you know, be walking away with those songs, those stories, and participate in those ceremonies. So thank you very much. Yeah. Right. Uh, mm.
Thank you, Dr. Leroy Little Bear. I always appreciate his words and his message, and I hope that um, people can take away something from what that he all spoke about today. I appreciate you, and I thank you for coming here. Here's a gift for you.
Oh, thank you so
Yeah.
much. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Dr. Leroy Little Bear. Before our chief, Norma Cataract, takes over, I just want to just talk about something super important. I know about 5 vehicles that have been broken into in our parking lot. There are security cameras in that parking lot, but you cannot a person that would want to find out or, h- who did it, you have to make a police report first. And then once you get the number, then you are to call. Just give me a second. 306 227 4767. I did have a phone call with them and I was very direct about how I was concerned that our people come from the north, they come far and wide. And that's not something that I want any of us to deal with. I've been told if they see 1/4 in your vehicle, they will smash your window, and it literally takes 10 seconds. The security company said that they do come around the parking lot like an hour at a time, but the people that go into the vehicles, they probably know their schedule. They probably know how to do it. Well, obviously, real quick, 10 seconds. So I just want, if there's anything in your vehicle that is people can see, it's a risk for you to have it stolen. So I just want to, I apologize. TCU has apologized. Yes, Barb, you bet. You need to call